Welcome to the Happiness Podcast. I'm Dr. Robert Puff. Sometimes we can all go through periods of time where we're depressed or sad. But I have some really good news. There's a recent study done that looked at what could help improve us when we're feeling low or depressed. And what it found was not medication, not drinking, not distracting ourselves with our iPhones, but instead getting out in nature. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know I'm a big advocate of getting out in nature. But I really love it when science confirms what seems so obvious to many of us. Being outside is just good for our souls. I grew up in the Midwest, and getting outside was a very normal part of my life. But then I went to college and then off to university. And when I finally got to graduate school, I realized I had become somewhat of an achievementaholic. I wanted to do really well in school because I wanted to keep going. I was working on my first master's degree at Princeton, and I wanted to go on and get another master's and a PhD in clinical psychology, so I knew I had to do very well in school. But thankfully, on my third year there, just when I was graduating, I came to terms with this achievement part of me and how I needed to change it because I was missing out on life. It was a beautiful day. I didn't have any schoolwork to do because I had graduated, and I was just lying out on this magnificent lawn, looking up at the clouds, watching them go by, and I realized I really had not been doing much of this my entire 3 years that I was here. And I really came to terms that I needed to change my desire to achieve with the desire to live. So when I came out to California to finish my PhD, I did that. I spent time in nature. I got actively involved in hiking in the Southern California Sierra Club, and it was wonderful. It really helped balance me, and I made sure I spent time outdoors. Well, towards the end of my program, it got pretty intense. I was doing my internship at the VA hospital in Sepulveda. I was working in private practice, and I was finishing up my dissertation. And one of the hardest parts about this was these 3 places were at different parts of Southern California, so I was doing a lot of driving. Well, I always found ways to make it work. For example, during the week, every day when I had my lunch at the VA hospital, I would go outside and sit on the grass and just enjoy being outside and in nature. And on the weekends, I actually wouldn't get in my car. I lived near the beach, so I was able to ride my bike everywhere. And I did. I really just stayed away from being in my car and spent a lot of time at the beach and just being outdoors. And I remember this time because I would run into my colleagues periodically who were doing the same thing that I was doing. And they just seemed so exhausted and just not doing well in life. And I knew my life was going quite well. But I do attribute it to the fact that I made time to be outdoors. And that's why I think this study that just came out is so prevalent for all of us, because we need to make time to get out in nature. I really like this study because it's a combination of 3 different universities, one in the UK, one in Austria, and one in Malaysia, where they researched to try to find out how being outside affected us positively or negatively. And they also looked at the amount of screen time that people had, like TV, computer, smartphones, and whether this affected them positively or negatively. It was done over 21 days, and it had 286 adults in the study, and they were randomly interviewed 3 times a day. So the questions about their mental health were actually asked in real time instead of retrospectively. Well, like you, I'm sure you're not going to be surprised by the outcome. They found that higher levels of happiness were associated with being outdoors. They also found that the higher amount of screen time was associated with lower amounts of happiness. They also looked at loneliness and again found that people felt less lonely when they were outdoors. And they felt more lonely when they had more screen time. Speaking of screen time, I'm sure we all have funny stories, but I remember when cell phones became a lot more popular, and I was going to a restaurant and I noticed a group of about 10 guys sitting at a table, and they all had their heads down. I thought they were praying, but they weren't. They were actually all on their phones. So the question we want to ask ourselves is, are we making time to be outdoors? And are we being careful about how much screen time we get? Because one is good for us and the other isn't if we get too much of it. But like I said earlier, this probably just makes common sense to all of us. I think a lot of research just confirms what most of us already believe. So the bigger question is, why don't we do it? If studies now support that being outdoors for us is good for us and will create higher levels of happiness, then what's keeping us from being outdoors and finding our happiness? Or if we are lonely, being less lonely? What's keeping us from making these very healthy decisions? That's the important question. So many of our decisions are basically momentum or inertia, or what's in motion will stay in motion until we do something about it. And to do something about it creates conflict, creates stress, creates uncomfortableness, so we don't do anything about it. We'd rather keep doing what we're doing, even if what we're doing is making us depressed. I mean, have you ever known a depressed person? You can give them lots of ideas, but they'll come up with reasons that they can't do those things. And so I think what's happening is, whatever we do is a habit. And we have to ask ourselves, have we cultivated a habit of getting outdoors? Because now we know, and we probably knew it before, it's really good for us. And too much screen time isn't. So, given that this is the case, and then we probably agree with it, how do we cultivate the skill of getting outdoors? Well, the first thing we have to do is decide that it's a priority. We're going to do this no matter what. But because of the no matter what, at times we are not going to feel like doing it. And that's where it hits the crossroads. We have to say, are we going to make these changes? Or are we going to continue to the way we are? Because we all know people that would do so much better by getting outdoors, going on hikes, sitting in a park, going for a walk. But they don't do it because they've created a habit of being indoors, hibernating in their rooms, and almost never coming out. And we know that those habits can be incredibly difficult to break. So if we're listening to this, we may be one of those people. And it may mean that, okay, deep breath, I'm going to do this no matter what. And even though it may be quite painful initially, but the good news is habits are habits. Once we start cultivating a habit of, say, getting up in the morning and going for an hour walk or a half an hour walk, and then in the evening when it cools down, going for another, perhaps half an hour walk, with time, this will become our habit. I remember once listening to a motivational speaker, Zig Ziglar, years ago talk about how he decided he wanted to lose some weight, get in shape, so he started to run. Well, he was a motivational speaker, so he traveled a lot, and one day he got to bed very late, and he set his alarm every day to get up and run, and he realized if he got up when that alarm went off, he'd only get 2 hours of sleep, and he had another busy day ahead of him, and it also looked like it might be raining outside. So he thought, well, I think I'll just let this one day slide. But then he took a deep breath and realized, if I do it today, it'll be easy for tomorrow for it to also skip. I'm not going to do that. So he got up that morning and ran. And he kept running and being in shape for, as far as I know, the rest of his life. Habits are habits, and sometimes creating new habits are challenging. But if we really believe in the end results of, I just want to be happy, and this study shows that just by being out in nature, even if we don't go for a walk, if we can just sit outside, our level of happiness will improve. And then something else beautiful will happen. We'll discover that being out in nature won't be a chore with time. For me, I love to exercise and I love to meditate. I do them every day. Every once in a while, not very often, but every once in a while, I can't fit in as much exercise or meditation as I would like. And I miss it as much as you may miss the screen time because you're outdoors in nature right now. Habits are habits. We cultivate bad habits and good habits, but they're just habits. So initially, it will be hard to change any habit. But if we can just hang in there, guess what? That new habit will become the habit, and it will be much easier for us to do it every day. It can take a month, it can take 6 months. It just depends on what the habit is. But if we're truly seeking to improve our lives, and we just want to be happier and less lonely, then being outdoors is good for our soul. It's something we can do every day. We can make it a priority. And if we do that, as this study shows, our level of happiness will go up. And if you think about it, everything we do ultimately is so that we can create a state of happiness. Our screen time may create a temporary state of happiness, but in the long run, this study shows it creates unhappiness and loneliness. So if we truly are seeking happiness, part of the equation is get outdoors, and get outdoors regularly. It isn't that hard to do, but we can do it. And if we do it and we work a little bit at it every day, so that every day we get to feel the wind blowing on our face, we get to feel the sunshine on our skin, we will find that happiness starts to grow stronger and stronger in our hearts, and we'll say, life is good. Thank you for joining me on the Happiness Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the podcast, please go to happinesspodcast.org. And until next time, accept what is, love what is.